All right. Welcome to Closed Space. No, I'm just kidding. But I thank you for joining us. Even when there's an exciting open space going on out there, it means a lot to us. We're going to get our talk started, I think, with a quick countdown. So 3, 2, 1. Zeus! Okay.
All right. But really, we're going to start with a story. So a few years ago, a bunch of coaches and trainers from the Scrum Alliance had the idea of getting together to collaborate on some of the initiatives that were meaningful to the coaches and trainers, to the community at large, as well as to Scrum Alliance. And they planned out a series of sprints where we were going to work together. And the first of these sprints occurred in Vancouver, Canada, where a group of CECs and CSTs gathered for 1 week to build something of value for the community. And so the trainers decided to focus on what now is the Path to CSP programs that you all have, and the coaches decided to focus on content to support the Certified Agile Coach journey. And this was an all-star team if you're simply looking at credentials and years of experience. However, we still experienced the same team forming and storming challenges that every team faces and that are described by Bruce Tuckman in his model stages of group development. So the most effective action that we took at the start of our time together to make sure that we were able to accomplish what we're there to do was to create working agreements. And those are them up there. We made it okay, for instance, to take a break when the energy was low. We also got clear on expectations with respect to, like, when are we starting our day? When are we ending our day? When is lunchtime? All of those types of things, and among a lot of other things that were there also. And so if you fast forward to the end of this week that we had together, we were able to deliver on multiple priorities, including a list of resources for CTC candidates that's still available on the Scrum Alliance website today. So here's what you can expect to take with you when you walk out of our session today. A deeper understanding of the why, how, and what of working agreements. Recognition of when to use working agreements. Increased ability to plan and facilitate a working agreement session. And 2 resources that you can use to create working agreements with your team. A working agreements canvas and a working agreements checklist.
So we'll start off, I guess, with a quick intro. For those of you who don't know us, this is Brock Argue. I'm Erkan Kadir. We're both certified enterprise coaches and certified team coaches through Scrum Alliance. We consider ourselves agile coaches, relationship systems coaches, and vertical development coaches. And our company is Superheroes Academy. We're based out of Calgary, Canada. So it's going to be that relationship systems coaching part that really flavors the talk that we do with you today. And one of the reasons we think that that pairs so well with Agile coaching is because Agile increases the interactions that we all have with one another exponentially, but it doesn't provide any guidance on how to build or navigate strong relationships. And so that's where sort of the relationship coaching part comes in. Okay. So why working agreements? So maybe your team is already working really well. And you're wondering to yourself, do I even need working agreements in the first place? Should I even bother investing in them if my team has already been together? Well, we're going to suggest that the answer to that question is yes, because working agreements can only make your team better. They're not just for teams that might be experiencing difficulties or challenges. They're actually a necessary component in making any good team great. And if you happen to be on a hybrid team or a virtual team, which I believe most of us these days, then working agreements are even more essential because you have the loss of all of these visual communication cues that we get when we're in person, and that leads to a lot more misunderstandings that you can get in front of with working agreements. And so because of that, you can think of working agreements kind of like a preemptive conflict management strategy, where your team gets a chance to design an atmosphere that they want. And then when situations change and become more difficult later, that atmosphere will hold, and you can get through those times a little bit easier. And so now we have overwhelming research that shows teams who invest in creating working agreements are going to seriously outperform those who don't. And here's just some of the things that we know. So we know that teams who have working agreements have higher psychological safety because they set boundaries around what is and is not acceptable behavior within the team. And so some examples of working agreements, such as there's no silly questions, it's okay to ask for help, every voice matters, are all examples of ways that we can increase psychological safety and just create that environment through working agreements. Working agreements are also going to increase dependability between team members on your team. And that's because it would be impossible for somebody to meet your expectations or treat you how you want to be treated until you make those expectations explicit, right? Until that happens, we're really just building a relationship through a bunch of passive-aggressive interactions. And working agreements are also going to increase role clarity. And this is something that a lot of the teams Brock and I work with are just absolutely yearning for. And one of the reasons I think so many teams want this is because even when you have really good job descriptions at the corporate level, it's never going to be enough to provide that role clarity. Because if you think about it, if I'm a Scrum Master on 2 different teams, the way I fulfill that role is going to be different on both of those teams, depending on what each one of them needs. And so, maybe one of them is a rock star team, and I'm going to step back and play more of a supporting role. Maybe a team's brand new, they've never done Scrum before, and I need to be in there a lot tighter with them, and that's okay. So it just becomes really essential for us all to sort of talk about how we're going to fulfill our roles in the context of that particular team through working agreements. So what are they? So working agreements are also known as explicit team norms or social contracts. And we think of them as the rules that sort of govern our behavior and determine what we're each going to give and receive in our professional relationship. So that's going to include things like how we interact, what we expect of each other, and how we're going to handle problems and things like that when they arise. They've been around really forever, ever since people have sort of started coming together in communities. But it wasn't until the 1700s that Thomas Hobbes first theorized about working agreements with his social contract theory, where he said that some people, or actually all people, are willing to give up some individual freedoms to create order in social settings. So, for instance, I might really enjoy the personal freedom I have to decide when I can work remotely from home. But maybe I also understand that if we don't have some time in the office together, we're not going to be able to move forward on things. So I might be willing to accept a working agreement such as core hours for a few hours on one specific day. And so we all participate in working agreements, whether we realize it or not, because sometimes those working agreements are going to go unspoken. And that might be a helpful thing, or sometimes it's helpful if you have a working agreement such as, we know to check in on one another when somebody's having a bad day, and we don't have to say it, we just do it. But you might have unhelpful unspoken working agreements too, like, making sure that nobody leaves the office before the boss does, because that doesn't look bad. And so the idea with these working agreements is that we get to talk about them, and we get to make the implicit explicit and bring them to light so that our teams can inspect and adapt them and just make sure that those norms that are governing our behavior are continuing to serve the team's best interests and their needs. And this is such an important part of them, and it's one of the reasons why transparency is one of the 3 pillars of Scrum, because we can't inspect and adapt something until we can see it.
Okay, so we're going to give you a few examples of situations under which you would have the benefits of using working agreements. And so first off, with your Scrum team, And so the quality of the relationships on your Scrum team can be a predictor of success. And so it's always good to have solid working agreements for your team. It's great if they can be created when the team is formed, but that's not always possible. But don't worry, it's never too late. So as soon as possible after the team is formed is also a great time to create working agreements. And if people are concerned about the time it takes to do that or whatever, it can always be justified by saying, well, doing this will help us work better together. You might also want to create working agreements between your Scrum teams and leaders. And this is maybe one you haven't heard before. In our experience, this is really, really important, and probably one of the most important working agreement sessions you can facilitate. In order for your Scrum team to be self-managed, you need managers to delegate decision-making authority to the teams. What happens in many transformations, however, is an Agile coach or a Scrum master will get the managers together, and then they'll figure out what their new role is like and how they're going to bring value, and they're going to align on some things as managers. And then the Agile coaches and Scrum masters are going to meet with the teams, and they're going to create working agreements and figure out how they're going to deliver and the logistics of Scrum and working together and everything like that. But then when you bring the leaders and the Scrum teams back together, it's fireworks. Managers have aligned as a group, and the set of teams or people within a team have aligned as well, but there is no alignment between the leaders or the teams. And so a better approach is to bring managers and their Scrum teams together to talk about what self-management looks like in their context and for them, and then create working agreements accordingly so that there's alignment now between the leaders and their Scrum teams. You may also have working agreements for coaching agreements. And so Scrum Masters are coaches to their team and the surrounding organization according to the 2020 Scrum Guide. And did you know that working agreements between a coach and a client, which here we're calling coaching agreements, are mandatory in any professional coaching relationship? It's so important that if you don't have working agreements in that coach-client relationship, that you're technically not their coach at all. Also interesting is there was a 2019 study that found that the forming of high-quality working agreements is critical for the achievement of coaching outcomes, and appears to be the primary predictor of coaching success, even outside of the tools and the ways that the coach helped that group achieve that success. And you may also want to create single-use working agreements for things like workshops or training sessions or those types of things. And so these are working agreements that are going to last for a short period of time, so you're not going to spend a lot of time building them, and you're probably capturing them on some kind of temporary medium like a flip chart or something like that that will get tossed away after the session is over. And these agreements can serve the purpose of enabling the success of the event that you're facilitating, and can be done really quickly, like I said at the start of the event. And the last type of working agreement we're going to mention is one-on-one. And so this is the type of working agreement you might have with a colleague. These are usually verbal and less formal working agreements, and they include things like how and when you're going to support each other, or how and when you're going to communicate on certain things or whatnot. And this type of working agreement will evolve as you continue to work together. Okay, so how to create working agreements. And so it's best to get the structure of the working agreement set along with maybe a few agreements just to get started. Sometimes we're concerned about we got to spend 2 hours in this session and build out all the working agreements and everything, but you don't need to. You just need something to get started. And then you're going to add to those working agreements when friction arises within the team and the team learns more about each other. So, you could spend that big, long period of time coming up with a detailed working agreement, but don't be afraid to just get a little framework together, a couple of agreements to get you started, and then, evolve it as time goes on. And so we're suggesting that even 30 minutes would be enough to do that, with maybe a little prep time for the Scrum Master. And there are a few guidelines that we'd also like to share to get you started. And so I mentioned the time already, around 30 minutes is a good starting time. You're going to want everyone in that working agreement session who is expected to abide by those working agreements. And so when we talk about working agreements for a Scrum team, that means everyone on the team. This is something you can do virtually or in person. And one thing you want to be aware of is just to avoid the home team advantage. So facilitate the session either entirely co-located or entirely remote so that one side of that equation doesn't have the advantage because that's where the facilitator is. You need a collaborative space, so an online whiteboard or sticky notes or whatever is useful with the purpose of visualizing the conversation. Okay, and then when to have these sessions. I mentioned as when the team forms or as soon as possible after that. But there's also endless other opportunities where you can form and help your teams form working agreements. So a team's retrospective might be a great time to update or create your working agreements. Maybe before starting the next big feature. Maybe when someone new joins the team, or maybe when someone leaves the team. At the start of a new year, or maybe any given Monday. There's just really no bad time to create working agreements to help your team be set up for success. Now, little pro tip for you. If you're the Scrum Master of a team, something that could be really useful is to have an outside facilitator facilitate the working agreement session for you so that you're able to participate in the role solely as a team member. Now, if that's not possible and you do have to facilitate the session, you just need to skillfully manage that conflict of interest that exists. And so just recognize that you're in a dual role and work with your team to help them understand how you're showing up. So you might have some way of indicating, right now I'm the facilitator, and right now I'm showing up as a team member with an opinion. That's one way to do it. Or you could tell the team, hey, I'm just showing up as a team member for this entire session. So that's how I'm going to come across, right? And so there might be different ways that you would do that just to make sure that the team knows how you're showing up. So another story. A few years ago, I was working at a client site with an existing team that they had. And this team was struggling with meeting their definition of done. So they had this really great definition of done, but they weren't meeting it, and they weren't accountable to each other. So the team went through a facilitated working agreement session where they came up with these 8 working agreements. And following the session, they posted them in a highly visible team area. And it's highly visible because it was the team area, but all the walls are glass in this office, so you could see them quite clearly from a lot of places. And then leaders in the organization noticed that team members were starting to hold each other accountable to the agreements after they had created them. And there was also a new energy that was coming up within the team due to the increased alignment that they had with each other through the working agreements that they created. This particular team then went to outperform other teams in the organization because they had aligned on a set of working agreements on how they're going to get their work done and how they're going to hold each other accountable.
So here is a test. Here is a tool that we like to use when we create working agreements called the Working Agreements Canvas for high-performing teams. It's called that because each one of the questions on this canvas is based on the latest research into what it takes to foster high performance in team settings. There are 9 questions on the canvas, and if you can help your team to align on all 9 of them, then you'll know that you've set your team up with the best chances for success. And so you'll find copies of the canvas at your table, and for those who are live streaming, you can download it through the QR code on the screen. And if anyone's interested in the research I mentioned, it's also available on both of those copies. So how it works is pretty simple. You sit down with your team and you document answers to each one of the questions directly on the canvas. Each one of those answers becomes a working agreement. And you can do this in one setting with the team, or you can do it in multiple sittings with the team. It doesn't really matter. If you've read Diana Larson's book, Lift Off, on how to kick off great teams, she would even recommend that you just start working with the team right away, because that's the best way to get to know each other. And then as points of alignment emerge, you can then document them on the canvas. All of those approaches are just as good as another. But let's take a closer look at each one of the questions on the canvas. So how will we build an atmosphere of cooperation, support, and encouragement? It's often said that we spend more time at work with our peers than we do with our families. I don't know if that's fully true, but even if it's close sometimes, it can be helpful to spend some time thinking about it. Like, how do we want it to be when we're together, given that we're going to be investing this much of our time? How will we make decisions? So what's the decision-making protocol that you're going to use, right? Is it like decider protocol from the core protocols? Is it benevolent dictator? Are we going to just take votes to break ties? How are you going to make sure that your team doesn't get locked in a painful consensus that makes your meetings take just like forever and ever and ever? How will we create the safety required for team members to bring their whole selves to work and freely share their ideas? This one's a psych safety builder, and we talked about why a little earlier. How will the world be different as a result of our success? So important for motivation. I think we've heard multiple times this week already that we need to connect the work that our team is doing to why it's important. What is each person's role, and what are they responsible for? So role clarity builder. How and when will we provide each other with feedback? So this is an important one. Usually when you first ask somebody in a professional environment, they'll always say, I just want it direct. That's a lie. Nobody actually can handle direct feedback like that. A really effective working agreement that we like is feedback privately and praise publicly. So if you have something nice to say it in front of everyone. And then if you want to correct someone or give them some help or whatever, pull them aside and let them know one-on-one. It'll be much easier to sort of process it and accept what you're saying. How will we bring our diversity to bear through genuine constructive conflict and lively debate? So working agreements are not just about keeping conflict non-toxic. They're also about making sure, at least this one, is about making sure that the conflict happens in the first place. Because if you have a team that doesn't have any conflict, they have that artificial harmony, maybe everyone's still wearing their professional masks and everyone's getting along, they might even be celebrating the fact that they're such a great team because they never fight. Well, actually, that team is stuck and they cannot reach a place of high performance. Because conflict is the birthplace of creative ideas and innovation, and it's how our teams bring their diversity to bear. So if you're a Scrum Master and that's your team, your job might be to actually stir the pot a little bit and bring some of that conflict to the surface. That's why we ask that question. How will we grow into T-shaped team members building resiliency around specific skill sets? So what we're doing here is we're mitigating risk around knowledge silos. And it speaks directly to this idea of Scrum teams being cross-functional. Really great way to do that is to just have a working agreement that says, hey, if there's any tasks that we have or technologies or something like that, that only one person knows how to work on, then we'll just make sure we always pair on those tasks. And so over time, we can organically break down those knowledge silos and distribute that knowledge across the team. What else is important in how we work together? This is just an open question. It can go really anywhere, and that's great. Something I might like to ask when we get here is, how are you going to celebrate success as a team? Okay, and so here's some horrible contrast, as well as some examples of working agreements that you might find in each one of the sections. We'll have the slides available offline afterwards, so we won't spend too much time here anyway. What's next? Okay. So there are many different ways to facilitate great working agreements sessions, but here are 7 steps that we've found helpful to us sort of along the way. And so the first step is to just make sure you have a strategy before you go into the session. Kind of obvious, right? But when we're thinking about strategy, we're going to be thinking about the formality that's required. So is it going to be one of those single-use sessions that are really informal that Brock was just talking about? Or does it need to be a little bit more formal than that? Maybe it's got like a dedicated workshop. It could be longer, an hour and a half or something like that. We're going to write things down. And you might even ask everyone to sign the working agreement saying that they agree to these, right? And so if you're doing this for a Scrum team, and that team is going to be together for the foreseeable future, we highly recommend that you stick with the more formal side of that continuum, okay? A couple more things on strategy, actually. And so also for strategy, we need to prepare an agenda. So what are the questions you're going to ask? What are the points of alignment that you want to focus on? We just showed you the working agreements canvas. You might just choose to ask all 9 of those questions. That's great. Or depending on the context and what maybe the team is struggling with or what you know about them, maybe you just want to pick a subset. That's great too. Even though we're going to pick some questions in advance, we're coaches, and so we're always going to stay flexible and dance in the moment with our clients, regardless of what emerges. And so maybe we throw those questions out and go somewhere the team wants to go. We'll probably even also ask, what are the points that you need to align on, and just make sure we work those into our agenda. And lastly, I'm going to set an intention for how I want to show up. So what's the energy as a facilitator that I want to bring? Because I know I'm going to set the tone for the session, and the group will follow. If I'm awkward about it, like, oh, working agreements are weird in a professional setting, everyone else is going to be weird. It's going to be a disaster. But if I show up confident and I believe in the value of what we're doing, and it's normal, then the work will progress easily that way, okay? Step 2 is to create buy-in, and this is really important because our session cannot be successful if a team does not buy into why they're doing something and what they're going to be doing. And so we always tell them what they're doing, what they're going to get out of it, and why they're doing it. And so I might say to a team, hello team, welcome to our session. Today you're going to be creating working agreements. And you're doing it because it's going to make you a better team. Research is clear that teams who invest in these sessions are going to seriously outperform the ones who don't. Do I have your permission to facilitate this session today? And then I'll deal with whatever emerges from that question. And then only then will we sort of move on once everyone's ready to move in the same direction. Step 3 is to visualize the conversation. And so now we're actually in the session, we're asking the questions and things, and as I'm taking notes, I'm going to make sure I do it in a place that's visible to everybody, like a flip chart, or if we're online, then we'll do it on like a Miro board or something like that. And the reason we do that is when 2 people are talking about a problem, that problem actually exists spatially in between those 2 people, and it acts as a point of separation, almost like a wall or something like that. But when we visualize a conversation, we actually take the problem and we move it out front onto the wall, and it forces a new orientation where we're standing side by side and we're solving a problem that's outside of us together as a team.
Is this a selfie moment or something?
Yeah, I know. Click, right? I should have done that with the phone. And so, you can see how this works physically as we're moving around when we do this in person like this, but the effect is just as pronounced when we do it in a virtual setting. And it's something that's really small, but it's highly intentional, and it can dramatically shift the atmosphere on a call. So definitely recommend trying it and watching for the difference. So step 3 is to avoid groupthink. Okay, so here's the default approach that I did for a long time, and I see a lot of other facilitators using as well. You might ask a question, like, how are we going to create an atmosphere of respect or something like that? And then what you'll do is you will ask everyone to brainstorm as many ideas as they possibly can on sticky notes, and then determine the most important ideas through some kind of voting mechanism like dot voting. Has anyone seen an approach like that before? Brainstorm stickies and then dot vote? Maybe it's the only approach, right? So don't do that. That approach is an absolutely horrible way of promoting groupthink, which makes groups basically share similar ideas and marginalize differing opinions, okay? So instead, we want to give you a different way of thinking about your role as a facilitator. Instead of thinking that you need to hear from every person in the room, your job is actually to hear from every opinion in the room. And so here's how this works. If you ask a question and somebody provides you with an answer, instead of going around robin, and let's say 6 people out of 7 all think the same way, I don't want to hear 6 people piling on more and more social pressure onto that last guy as to why this is the best idea and everybody has to go on with it. Instead, I'm going to listen to the first person, and then I'm going to say something like, well, who has an opposite opinion to what was just shared? Or who thinks differently about what we just heard? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create space for that one lone opinion to sort of come out. And if you can work like that, hear from every opinion instead of every person, you'll go a lot deeper, and you'll actually move your conversations a lot faster. So step 5 is capture the deeper meaning. So as we are taking notes, it's actually not a helpful thing or even useful for me to capture absolutely everything that's being said, because I'm just going to produce this long scroll of a working agreements document that is impossible to use later on and to update and these things. And so instead, I'm going to just wait until I hear major points of alignment and only capture those. So as an example, if somebody suggests a working agreement of respect, I'll say great, but I'm not going to write it down just yet. I'll ask them some question to go deeper, such as, okay, well, how will you know that respect is present? What are some concrete, observable behaviors that you can watch for that'll let you know you're on track with this idea of respect? And so that's when we might start hearing things like, well, I need you to show up on time for me to feel respected, or I need you to let me finish speaking before you interrupt in order for me to feel respected. And so those are great. And so I'm going to wait until we start getting to those specific observable behaviors, and only then am I going to write things down. Step 6 is check for alignment. So after each section, definitely once at the end, I'll ask a question like, how close is what we have so far to being good enough to get started with? And just make sure that everyone's happy with what we've got. And then the last step is to build an accountability, because obviously we don't want to create these working agreements and then just forget about them. So you can do this in a lot of ways. A couple good, powerful coaching questions. How will you keep each other accountable to these working agreements so that I don't become the working agreements police as your Scrum Master or whatever? How can you keep these working agreements visible? What can you each be responsible for personally in terms of making sure that these happen? So anything, right? And you can ask lots of different questions around that.
Okay, so it's time for an activity. So imagine that you and the people at your table have been asked to survive on an island for 3 nights. What we want you to do is take 4 minutes with the people at your table and maybe choose 1 or 2 of the sections off of the canvas that you have and just fill it out together. And then at the end of the 4 minutes, we'll just hear from a couple of tables and see what you come up with.
Felder Spiel. That's how you
We've
say
got 10 left.
We've got 10 left. Okay.
This will take 4.
Okay.
A quick debrief, and then we go from there. Let's just wrap up after that, right?
What else do we have?
Oh, I still have all those.
Oh. Well, you could just do a couple of them.
I can go fast.
Yeah.
It is.
Gotta make sure I shout out. Oh. Like, shut up? Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So I know that was quick, but hopefully, there's a little bit that you have that you could share. All right. Okay. And so what I would just ask is, if you're going to share, just wait till the microphone gets to you so that the people online can hear what you have to say as well. Okay, so I'd like to hear from someone. Okay, so Zach, something that you found most important in your working agreements.
I'm not sure about important, but let's say what we got to in 4 minutes. The first thing that popped up was food. So we're clear on being able to survive because Helmut said that we can't eat one member and we all need to survive, so that was quite important.
Physical safety before psychological safety. That makes sense.
That's right. And then we got to really some kind of something deep. We said we need to be able to ask for help because some of us might be less comfortable once we are in the jungle, starting with myself and my fear of mosquitoes. And then we thought about, okay, so how are we going to make decisions? And we felt, okay, to maybe what we could start with is having a tiebreaker kind of person who can kind of help us get through decisions quickly. That's all we managed to do.
Thank you for that. Another popular one is bring your own toilet paper. So you might see that as well. Okay, so we're going to zip through this pretty quickly here just to kind of highlight some key principles to keep in mind. And it's really important after you create working agreements, how do you keep them valuable, right? How do you make sure that they still have value for you? And so principle number 1, you've heard us say this a few times because it is the most important thing, is just make it visible. And so make sure that your working agreements are posted visibly, that their team sees them all the time when they walk in and out of the room or when they go in and out of their backlog in Jira or whatever that looks like, but just make sure it's visible. One of the things that's important here is to balance accessibility as far as the team being able to see it all the time with confidentiality in terms of keeping the team safe with what they've put in their working agreements. Principle 2 is to call out friction. And so we've identified this already as a great opportunity to augment your working agreements with what's really happening. And so when friction comes up in your team, ask the team, hey, is there a working agreement that informs this situation? And if there isn't, ask the team, well, what do you want to do? And when they make a decision, then you add that decision to the working agreement going forward. Principle 3 is to make them self-reinforcing. So basically automate them, right? And so if there's any way that you can automate your working agreements, that's great. And so things like, hey, you know, someone has to review all the code that's checked in. So you might have a reviewed by field on your check-in form or something like that. Number 4 is update working agreements often. And there are tons of situations when you can update or review your working agreements. When a new team is formed, each and every day, maybe in your daily stand-up or when situations come up, sprint retrospectives, when people join the team or leave the team, maybe if you start a new initiative or product or feature or whatever it might be, you know, just any time that something is happening can be a time to update your principles, update your working agreements based on this principle. Okay, so I did promise you 2 resources. And so you have the working agreement canvas on the table in front of you, and on the previous slide, this here is the checklist that basically goes through everything we talked about today. And so you can use that to plan out your next working agreement session. I'm just pausing for cameras.
Yeah. Great contrast there.
Yeah, it might not work. We will provide the slides to Scrum Alliance, so you will have access to this afterwards, so no worries there.
Okay. And then just to wind down here, a quick shout out. So the content for this talk actually comes from an online course that Scrum Alliance offers free to all of its members, part of the new Learning Journeys section of their website. And so the Working Agreements That Works course was actually also created in collaboration with a course designer from Scrum Alliance who's phenomenal at what she does, Rebecca Felderspiel, and Carol Miller in the back helped with some of the content as well. So applause for them. And so if you like this content, there's actually already, go back for a sec, Brock. There's already 9 separate courses to support you all on your learning journeys after certification. That's free on there, so check it out. And then also make sure to check out the Learning Journeys booth that they've got at the conference, and you can say hi to Rebecca and tell her what a great job that you think she's doing with this content and with some of these courses. And so we hope that you enjoyed this session. We know you enjoyed this session. Here's some of the things that we offer and some of the ways that we get engaged with the community. And do we have time to hear from one person or two?
Sure.
Okay. And just to end off, we always like to end every coaching session with a learning moment. And so we'd like to hear from 2 or 3 people. What's something that you found useful that you're going to be taking away from the session today? And then we can get the mic brought around as well.
And you can just shout it out. Yeah, go ahead, just shout it out.
Well, my takeaway was hello. This groupthink stuff was very interesting because it really helps this minority to still be heard and maybe change others' opinion.
Great, thank you. Yeah. There's another one at the back there, Sarah.
It was the capture the deeper meaning, so you don't just write it down when they say respect, but you try and look for a way to check that that is happening, and how, I forget the wording that you used.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And if anyone wants to chat some more, I'll be at the happy hour, so don't corner me here. I'll be over there, and I would love to chat with you more about this or about how we can support you in your journey. And thanks for coming and joining us today.